So in this episode, we have more smokes in a tiny space than is needed, a heavy engineering plant with huge risks, and a quote for a new install in an aluminium factory, plus more. This is AMP5 Vlog, Episode 7. Morning, it's Tuesday. Yesterday the van was in for the MOT, so I didn't film yesterday. So I've got a couple of jobs today. I'm on site now, just about to go into a job. It's a surveyor's, it's just a little office, extinguishers and alarm. I don't think we're doing emergency lights now. I'm hoping not, because I want to get in and out quick. And if I'm doing emergency lights, I have to wait around for a few hours whilst they run the test. So just recap. I didn't know if I mentioned it, but a recap from the job, the last job out, which is probably follow on from this, I don't know, was I had no signal, so I couldn't see on the certs. The certs work on the cloud, and you have to have signal sometimes, and it's really tricky, and I was waiting. But I managed to I looked back at the certs. We did recommend at that last job, we did make recommends last year to the kill of them needed a bit more A-class. We've expanded on that because this year I saw those gas cylinders. So I looked back, he looked like Ayrton last year when he'd been. I'm not sure whether those gas cylinders were around or whether he clocked them or whether he thought about that, but he certainly did pick up on the fact that they needed a more A-class cover there. They've got no A-class cover. So we've made those recommendations and we've put it to the customer, and we'll wait to see what they see. But yeah, I've got a nip in here. I'm going to keep it quick. Get in here, do this fire alarm, show you this one. It's a very small system, but it's an old one. I think it's an old Menvia, which is a bit of an old classic. And then we're off to Aldridge to an engineering firm where it's all fire extinguishers, but it's a messy one, but it's a good one because there's some big machines there. It'll be quite interesting to show you. So right, I'm going to crack on with this. Let's do it. So I quickly serviced the extinguishers here. Make a note of the type and the fact that they're not on the wall. We'll talk about that in a minute. You'll see me here quickly popping the sounder circuits out so I can test the alarm, because the walk test mode in this is a bit of a bugger. Naughty me. Quickly check the core points, back out to the van to grab the solar kit, and then quickly test the detectors. Also here, just check out how many detectors are in the office. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I've just pulled the sounder circuit out because it's a lot easier on those panels. Trying to put it into walk mode's a bit of a faff on them, and it's a really small building, so it's a lot easier just to pull the sounder circuits and then just go back to the panel, check it's all working. With the detectors, there's a flashing light on a flashing LED on the detectors, so you just go around and quickly check those. You may have noticed that the extinguishers aren't mounted and the correct type. There's a powder extinguisher and a CO2. Now the CO2 is fine. The powder extinguisher technically gives you the A-class rating. We didn't supply the extinguishers here. They're actually the customer supplied themselves. We have recommended that they're mounted, but the customer doesn't want hooks or anything on the wall, so we have recommended stands, but that hasn't been actioned either. So what we will do when it gets to the 5-year test is probably make a strong recommendation for those powders to come out and foam or water to be put instead. But yeah, at the minute, it is what it is. So the alarm in that one, obviously, even though it's old, the actual coverage is quite overkill. There's 3 detectors upstairs and 2 downstairs, 1 in each little office downstairs. Top places can very small, and then 3 detectors upstairs, 1 on the landing, and then 2 in the main office, which are way too close to each other. Not too close, but like 1 detector roughly will cover like a 7.5 metre radius. So really 1 detector, really just the one on top of the landing is adequate for that type of building. That building has probably got close to what I'd call L2 coverage. It had got every room bar a couple really covered. L1 is for those who don't know, the most extensive coverage. Pretty much it's detectors in every single cupboard, every single room. L2 is a bit of a stage down from that L3, L4. Realistically, in a building like that, you don't need anything more than L4. There's an argument whether you need detection altogether, or you get away with core points. But it's when it's been fitted with that alarm system. But it's got 5 detectors and 3 core points in a building that's probably smaller than most living rooms and bedrooms. That's the size, the entire sort of size. It's like a small 2 up, 2 down type property. Effectively, it's just an office, a very small office, 2 offices downstairs, 2 offices upstairs, and that's it. So yeah, the coverage is above and beyond. So the extinguishers, the coverage there is fine. They've got an A-class cover and CO2. CO2 is all really what you need, but you need some sort of A-class cover. Now, there is an argument, technically you need 2 A-class per floor, so you could argue that those 2 powders they got, actually you need at least 2 of those. Now, realistically, you shouldn't be having powders indoors. 2017 regulations said they were a lot more stricter on that. They've since retracted that a little bit. They used to say, like, well, years ago when I first started, it was always powders have never been recommended indoors because it impairs vision, they cause a lot of mess, they're just not ideal. And then 2017, they kind of tightened down on that a lot. And there was a lot of extinguisher engineers saying an absolute no to extinguishers indoors. And a lot of, say, some of the national companies interpreted that as meaning no extinguishers, no powder extinguishers are indoors. So anybody had a powder, they were pulling them out left, right and centre. Now they've kind of retracted that a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure actually how much the regulations have changed, just some of the nice wording from must or should, words like that. So effectively now, it is still not recommended to have powder extinguishers indoors. Certainly not in an office environment. They're just not needed. And if they go off, if you use one, it's going to make a hell of a mess. It's going to cloud your vision. If you do need to evacuate the building, you're not going to know which way is left or right. And so they're just not recommended at all. They're just not ideal. Now, they bought all their kit themselves a few years ago. We're about 3 years in to. Let me just get around here. We're about 3 or 4 years into servicing them. They bought their kit, so they're going to be coming up to being replaced in the next year or two. We did not supply them or recommend them anything. They didn't contact us. They're a surveying company, so I think they've got a little bit of knowledge about regulations, which is that thing where it's a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. They knew they needed some A-class cover, they needed a CO2, and they've gone with the cheapest option. They've gone online and they've bought a powder because the powder says it does A class and B and all the rest of it, and so obviously they've done that. Now we wouldn't ever turn around to a customer and say, right, let's just take this out now, because the regulations do change, and so often there'll be things where you say, well, this isn't really suitable now, we need to get rid of it. But in most cases, you get rid of it at the next 5-year service. That way, it's not costing the customer. At that 5-year, the customer's going to have to replace that extinguisher effectively or have it extendedly serviced, so it's going to need a service exchange. And so it's much, much easier for us just to swap that out for the suitable extinguisher. So when that 5-year period comes up, which I believe is 2026, we will then just say to the customer, right, what we need to do now is swap this out for a water or a foam. As for whether or not you need 2 A-class, so technically you need 2 A-class extinguishers per floor. In that situation, my personal opinion would be that 2 A-class extinguishers would be overkill, because effectively then you'd have 3 extinguishers per floor. And in reality, you could probably get away with just 1 extinguisher upstairs. In my opinion, it's such a small building. Every time I've been, the upstairs has never been used. There's a bit of a meeting room up there, but it's never been used. Like I say, the surveyors, so the majority of the time the guys are out and about surveying properties and doing stuff like that, like conveyancing and things for people who are buying mortgages, buying properties. And so, of course, the only person that's there is a lady in the office, and there's a small office downstairs at the back. So in my opinion, having 2 extinguishers, 2 A-class extinguishers and a CO2 would be very much overkill. You'd end up with 6 extinguishers in a small property like that, and the whole thing really could be serviced by 2. We are on site to service more fire extinguishers. As you can see, this is a really heavy industrial environment. Lots of big machines, lots of forklift, lots of plant machinery, welders, blowtorches, live flames. It's got it all here. Gas bottles, oxygen bottles, everything. So when we come to the coverage of this, it really just takes care of itself, in the sense that we obviously look after, make sure there's extinguishers on all evacuation routes, we make sure there's extinguishers on all the exit, but also we cover all the risks. So every single one of these machines, every single area where there's a risk, we make sure that there's enough fire extinguishers and fire points in those areas. And by just doing that, you easily get the minimum cover. We've just quickly done that one. Got a few bits to do extra. I was trying to get hold of one of the main gaffers there. Let me take these headphones out, they annoy me. I was trying to get hold of one of the main gaffers there, but I can't find him anywhere, and he's here somewhere, but he's not. And I've searched for him for a bit, but I kind of know him anyway. We've kind of met out of work and stuff like that. This is probably my oldest customer now. Way back when I first started, these guys were right there at the beginning. And Paul, who's the gaffer here, who looks after all health and safety and stuff, who turned this place around back in the day when it first came here. It was very old school. It still is quite old school, but it was really old school, and it was very much that old school attitude to health and safety and fire safety, and that attitude of like, we just got to be more careful. We used to have this with a lot of farmers back in the day. If somebody got their hand chopped off by a machine, it weren't because there wasn't measures put in place, it was because people need to be more careful. We know now, yes, there's always that thing of like health and safety gone mad and everything, but the truth is, if we put measures in place, it does make people safe. Morning, it's Wednesday morning, it's -1. It was -2 a minute ago, but it's moved up to -1 degrees. Bloody freezing. Got a few jobs to do today. Got a customer that I've not been to for a while. A little company that does like refrigeration and stuff, but they're just a tiny little unit, little office, so nothing there, just extinguishers. Then afterwards, we've got to go to a regular customer that go to weekly, usually pop in like once or twice a week sometimes, and they do like conversions on vans. They turn them into they turn them into coffee vans, and then it's like a franchise where you go out and you say your coffee and all that sort of jazz. And they're quite interesting because they have an extinguisher in each one, but the interesting thing about that is it's the pad testing, because they've got a load of solar stuff in there, so they've got 240 volts all the time off an inverter, and they've got a load of appliances that need pat testing, and it's quite an awkward one. The first time we went out, it was a bit of a tricky one to test because of the way it's all wired up and the way they're plugged up and everything. Since then, I've made up a load of adaptions and extensions and stuff specifically for that job. So we'll go and do that one. That'll be quite an interesting one to show you kind of how we try and pat test the fridges and the pie heater and all that sort of stuff. And then I've got a new customer this afternoon. We're heading over to got a new customer this afternoon. We're heading back over to Hinckley. It's apparently it's an aluminium place. Something to do with aluminium. They make sort of canopies or something out of aluminium or something like that. But we're not dealing directly with the customer at the minute. We're dealing with a health and safety company, and the health and safety company is based down south. And I've gone the wrong way because I was thinking I was in a different place. Should have come straight on at that roundabout. Never mind. I could have. Oh no. I'm confused. I could have. Oh no, this is the right one. It is the right one. I was like, I was in the wrong place. No, I'm not. I'm in the right place. I was getting very confused then. Turn right here. So yeah, it's an aluminium company, but I'm not dealing with the aluminium company. We're dealing directly with the health and safety company. The health and safety company is based down south, and apparently they're coming up and they've done like a whole review. By the sounds of it, they go into the building, they check. Now, health and safety companies are usually okay. They usually they're quite nice to deal with because they're switched on when it comes to fire safety and stuff, so they're a bit more switched on, but they can go a little bit too far in one way. So for example, in this circumstance, they've told me that the fire alarm needs ripping out and starting again. Now I know the industrial estate and I know the buildings, and they're not that old, so it looks like they've got a delivery. I wonder if I can. I'm just going to pull down here for a minute until I see what's going on there, give it a spin round. Yes, so I think I've said, well, let's have a look and see if we can service it first before we completely condemn it, rip it out. Because obviously a newer system is a lot more expensive. A new system is a lot more expensive than servicing the old one. So apparently it's got loads of faults on it. It's been not been serviced since 2015, and it's been it's not been working. They've been told it hasn't worked for years. What they mean by hasn't worked, I don't know. So the easiest thing to do is go over and have a look at that. So that'd be quite an interesting one. And I think in general, they're just going to look at fire safety extinguishers. Apparently the health and safety company have bought some extinguishers. So they said they arrive in yesterday afternoon, and then we'll need servicing. So I was like, okay, no problem. I just kind of agreed. So it'll be very interesting to see what sort of qualification and what sort of experience the health and safety company got. Sometimes like I say, health and safety companies are good to deal with because they're a bit more switched on. So when you're having these conversations about risk and what's required, they get it. Where they can be a bit of a problem is they can be a bit of a jack of all trades. So they go in and their sort of health and safety and their facility management, and they know a little bit about all of it. So they kind of go in and go, this place, they know it needs extinguishers. They maybe know what the minimum requirements are, and then they get a load of extinguishers, and then sometimes it's little things you go, actually that's not suitable. So we'll watch this space, be an interesting one to go see. But first, I've just arrived here, and they've got a delivery in, and I don't want to park in their neighbour's parking spot. So I'm just going to check out. But yeah, see you in a minute. Right, that was very quick, in and out. No messing about. Only 3 extinguishers. So we're going to get on the road. Yeah, only 3 extinguishers. In and out nice and quick. Nothing needed replacing. You might have a quick look there. So it's a small unit. They've got an office and they've got like the unit next door. There's a door between them. But because it's all on that one floor, the powder that's in the workshop area, which is perfect for that area, is also an A-class extinguisher. So that gives them that A-class cover for that whole of that ground floor, which means we don't have to put another A-class extinguisher in the office area. They just have the CO2, which recognises the risk that they've got, because the risk in the office is predominantly electrics. Now you might have saw on the video there some cooking equipment, some big commercial appliances. None of that's live, that's not got gas to it, it's nothing like that. It's purely a showroom. That's what those guys do. They fit all that sort of stuff. So of course they've got a load of it just in their office, so if anybody wants to come, they can show. I suppose it's good for training or whatever it may be, but it shows kind of what they do. In the warehouse, you might have also saw that there was a mezzanine floor, and we got a little single 2K powder up there. Now again, you can have that argument that you got 2 A-class extinguishers or 2 extinguishers per floor, and do you need 2 up there? Does that really constitute? Does that really make it a floor, basically? And that's an argument. Now, you could argue with some mezzanines they don't need anything at all. It's a bit overkill to put an extinguisher on the top of the mezzanine. You've got one at the bottom of it in the area. It's a very small space. I think it's right to have one in that situation. You've got quite a lot of stuff up there. I think when we first went, that was a workshop up there, but it just kind of shows you that you can go overkill. Like if you were to go belt and braces in that place, like some of these national companies do, they'd be going into that building, they'd be putting 2 A-class extinguishers downstairs. They'd have one in the office, one in the workshop. They'd probably have another CO2 in the workshop, and they'd probably have like another powder on the mezzanine floor. So all of a sudden you've gone from 3 extinguishers to what? 6 extinguishers. I think some engineers would be overzealous and even treat the office and the workshop separately. But you don't need to do that. It's a small building. You've got A-class, which is the powder. You've got a bit of everything in that workshop, so the powder is suitable. You could argue, do you want powders indoors? But it is a proper workshop. As you'll see when we arrived, that shutter was open, and that's pretty much how it is most of the time. So I'm comfortable with having the powder extinguishers in that workshop area. And yes, in the office, we have discussed before, don't have powders in the office, it's not suitable. but you've got to strike that balance. You've got gas cylinders and I think a few things like that in the workshop. So I think it's one of those, you could go overkill and maybe put a foam in the office, but in reality, what they're really reaching for in the office is that CO2 extinguisher. So hopefully that gives you these small buildings still show you these little, they're only tiny, but it's about picking the right things, and it's common sense as well. Like, you can go overkill, but you imagine having 6 extinguishers in a small building like that. That's just massively overkill. It's a cost that they don't need, and more importantly, you're going to encourage people to keep tackling a fire if they're in that building. If they're in that building, there's a fire and there's 6 extinguishers available to them, and it's a small business where you've got the owner of the business in there, you are encouraging those people to stay in that building and try and tackle that fire. So next up is a customer that I can sometimes visit as much as once a week. They convert these Mercedes Vitos into really cool coffee vans. The workmanship that goes into these vans is absolutely amazing, and they have loads of kit in it. There's like fridges, ovens, little pie heaters, obviously the coffee machine. It's all kitted out with like solar power, Victron solar power. So if you're into solar stuff and you're a bit geek like me, you'll understand what that is. And obviously what we have to do is we've got to come in, we've got to test the fire extinguisher, but we also have to do all the pat testing. So it's quite a tricky one actually. All the plugs, as you can see, are inside here, and I've actually made up some extension leads so they can fit through these holes and through these gaps, so I can get to the actual metal surfaces and the other appliances. Back in the van, just heading back. Right, so that's that one done. Quite interesting. Bit all over the place that was today. Usually they've got all the vans kind of lined up and ready to go, but this time they've got like new vans in. I think they were just trying to cram a lot in, and they've got a lot of new franchisees in, so we had to go into the showroom and stuff like that. There was the iPads there that were still in the boxes, so there was still a lot of stuff that was yes, there was a lot of stuff that was beg your pardon, still not installed into the vehicles yet. So what we usually like to do is give like a certificate or like a register for each vehicle. So I said what we'll do is we'll test everything as long as everything passes, and then because everything does pass, it's all new stuff pretty much, we'll then just give a generic register for each vehicle, and go from there. There was a few interesting bits. Typical, you've got to be on your bum trying to get underneath it. There's a few tight spots, quite hard places. Some of those holes and those crevices, we kind of worked it out. So we've actually made up leads, and I've made up some extensions for the pat tester specifically just for that job. Yeah, we've made some leads and some stuff specifically just for that job, and that's solely just so we can just get through those gaps. It's just easier. Also, you might have noticed on the cooker and the pie heater and stuff, there's lots of individual drawers, and I always just, as a matter of course, I test each one of those surfaces. So there's a metal surface, there's like a metal drawer, and there's like a this, that, and the other, and each one of those I just test, and they always get continuity. So they're obviously, everything's kind of connected, but I always just think I want to test each circuit, just because it's a moving vehicle and I don't know how things are wired up behind it. And if there was a fault at some point, and you don't know at the same time if there's a fault, it's also, is the continuity going to break between the drawers? And I always get continuity, and it's fine, but for some reason, so the continuity test pass, but I always just think, like, in theory, you could just test it to one of the surfaces and say, well, it's passed. But actually, I always like to think that I test it on each of the surfaces, because you just don't know. You don't know how that wiring's run, how it's been manufactured. It only takes, like, somebody to have crimped a cable when they're installing it, and then that cable rubs with the movement of the vehicle, and that becomes where the electrical fault is. I mean, let's be honest, in that, it's probably just going to blow a fuse, but it's just that, to be sure type scenario, just checking it all. So yeah, so that's all them done. Like I say, it's quite interesting, different vehicles. They're all goes out to franchisees, good little business. We go in there often, sometimes weekly, we can be, certainly a few times a month are in there. So I'm off to the new customer now. The chap from the health and safety company, he's had to head off home, so he won't be there. I think I'm just going to meet the client, the actual end user, on site. We're going to have a look at the alarm, service these fire extinguishers, and then go. So arrived, yeah, first look at the panel. I've got a flashing light for supply healthy, which I don't think is correct. And I've got 2 fault lights in the zone. As you can see, it's an old Chubb Zone Master. Yeah, not so much old but gold. I'll have a quick look around the warehouse to see if I can see an obvious fault. So I have a quick scout around the warehouse and I clock this detector. I get up into this other room that's used as storage for a bit of a closer look. Right, I've come into, basically, that's a better view. You can see it there. I'm going to need, tripping over everything. You're not going to need up here, I don't think. Looking at this warehouse, is there an argument, I've got to be in the dark again, is there an argument that you don't need detection in this warehouse area? You've got some electrics, it's mostly aluminium. Let's see if I wonder if they had a fire risk assessment done. It's all mostly storage. Break glass points here. Obviously, your classic fire exit that's got a cage on it and bolted shut. So, but it looks like they're renewing all their health and safety stuff. So I'm just being nosy and seeing if there's any other risks or anything that need cover. Basically, you've got a shutter there, a main entrance, fire exit over there, and another fire exit over there. What I'm doing now is, obviously I've looked at what the fault is, but they've actually asked me to quote for a new system. So what I'm doing is, I'm just looking behind these racking, and I'm looking at like the access, and I'm looking at a few different options, depending on what their risk assessment says. Adamant they want a new panel. Kind of agree, actually. It is time for a new system. I did, just after that I showed you there, the that detector that's been smashed off, he's pretty adamant that that was only done recently and the panel's been in fault for ages. So he said, look, honestly, it just needs a whole new system, so we want to get it all done. I was like, fine, that's absolutely fine. It is an old system. God, those Zone Masters, they are ancient, not great. Is it worth trying to get through all the test the cable in, use the cable in? I think I'm going to have a word with this health and safety dude and see if he's done a risk assessment. I'm assuming the reason he's been in is because he's done a fire risk assessment, and I want to see if he has recommended a category type for the building, because I don't think it warrants having detection in that warehouse. I don't think, I mean, maybe I'll have a look on the videos back, maybe put like a heat detector or something near some of the compressors and stuff, or maybe put something there. But I think personally, we just manual core points in the warehouse, detectors in the foyer, in the little reception bit, and in the office. And yeah, and go down that road. Do we really need to have early detection, or at least smoke? We don't want to have smokes in the warehouse, and that would drastically bring down the installation cost and the labour cost. It means we haven't got to get a lift, so it's a lift or a cherry picker in, which then reduces the amount of materials we use in running those cables, reduces the amount of materials we use in the ceiling, but most of all it reduces the labour cost, because the labour cost by having to put it in the ceiling would put like another day or two on it, I would say, at least. Yeah, you know, clipping it all in, and you get around it probably in a day. It's a bit overkill what's there, so I think let's have a word with the safety dude, which I'm recording now. Let's have a word with the safety dude, see if he's done a risk assessment, see if that risk assessment gives us a system category to work to and spec. But I think detection in the warehouse. Yeah, because there's nothing. Or we go for beams. I don't know, because the forklift probably couldn't. I'm just kind of thinking about this out loud. Probably saw me there as well. I quickly looked whenever I'm going to quote for a new install. I do a few different things. I look at what's required. I make some notes. I then always look how we're going to run the cables and where we're going to run the cables. I look where we're going to run all the cables. I look where the power supply is coming from, including the distribution board, because quite often we have to run another power supply, especially if things that old. They don't have a fire rated cable coming from the distribution board to the panel, to the fuse spur, so we have to put in a new cable there. But I check all the cable runs where we're going to go and just make sure we've got good access, make sure we can get round the back, make sure we can get ladders up and stuff like that, because there's nothing worse than like thinking you've worked it all out, mapping the cable runs out and everything else, and then you get there on the day and you realise there's a workbench and there's a load of crap in the way and there's a load of racking and there's a load of material stacked up. And that's why I take pictures and stuff as well, just to make sure as we quoted it, that's what we saw. And then if there is any issues afterwards, if they move anything or change anything or pile it up, when we turn up we're going to look, when we quoted, mate, this is what it looked like, and now it doesn't look like that. So it's going to, it might sometimes it can put like a day of labour on the job, because you've got to move all that material, you've got to whatever. It could be all sorts. We've had all sorts. We've gone into some right messy places over the years, and learnt some lessons where we thought, this would be really simple. The vault is already trunking around the side of the building, and we've gone in, it was filthy. We did one that was just up here actually a year or so ago. The guy was a nightmare. Lovely guy, just really classy, but just a bit clueless, and not a great payer either. Luckily he had finance, but the finance company could deal with him, not us. It was one of them. But anyway, so we're going to go back to the office now. I'll do that quote straight away whilst it's fresh in my head, because I'm only around the corner from it, and catch up with the paperwork for the day. Hopefully that kind of gives you a rough idea what we're going to come to. Speak to the guy as well. So all good.